9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon. Welcome to The Right Fit, second season. I'm Darryl, Jacobs, your host, and ESPN College Basketball College Analyst, as well as the Executive Director of Rising Coaches DEI Alliance. Join me every Friday, noon Eastern Time, with guests and decision makers for both the professional world of sports as well as collegiate athletics. Joining me today, I'm very privileged to have the Vice Chancellor, Director of Athletics, University of Kansas City, Missouri, also known as UMEKC, Dr. Brandon Martin. Dr. Martin, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Darryl. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you can be here with us today. So before we get started with the Q&A, I want you to tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself and talk about your journey into collegiate athletics and why.
Sure. So my journey in intercollegiate athletics started in 2000 at the University of Southern California. I'm a three-time alum at USC. Had the opportunity to work for Mike Garrett, the athletic director, in 2000. It was Pete Carroll's first year. Worked there for 10 years, from a director of admissions, student athlete admissions, all the way up to assistant AD, associate AD, to the number 3 person in charge, all the way up to 2010. That was during the dynasty years of Pete Carroll. That was where I cut my teeth and learned the industry and found my niche on what I wanted to be in the industry and what type of indelible mark I would leave in higher education. From 2010, had the opportunity to work for Joe Castiglione at the University of Oklahoma for 3 years. One of the best decisions I ever could have made, working for Joe, being in Norman, Oklahoma versus being in Los Angeles, was a little bit of a culture shock, a little bit, but he taught me a different way to be an administrator, taught me some of the lessons to be learned that I hadn't gotten in the 10 years at USC. So it was a fantastic experience. Transitioned there to Cal State Northridge, where I was the athletics director for 5 years. Did some transformational things there, and it was a chance for me to get back home, which was great, and really proud of the work that I did there, me and my team did there, and was recruited to come here to UMKC, and that was in December of 2018. I've been here 3 years as of today. And it's been a great experience to be here in Kansas City. The people make the place, and it's such a sports town. And there's so many alums that we have that support us. 68% of our alumni are within 15 miles of campus, and so that's remarkable. And so it's been a really good experience for me. In terms of the why, Darryl, it's about what I said before, being cognizant of the mark that I want to have as an African-American man in higher education, not only as a director of athletics, but as a professor. I serve as a professor in 3 disciplines on campus, in the Block School of Business, in the College of Education, and in Race, Ethnic, and Gender Studies. I'm also a Vice Chancellor, which means that I'm highly engaged in the academic affairs side on campus in retention and graduation for underrepresented populations. And so I play multiple positions on campus, and I firmly believe that it's a godly assignment, and I'm here for a reason, here to serve primarily, but here to make a mark. And for 3 years, it's been a great journey for not only myself, but for my family.
Well, happy anniversary to you. It's just so
Thank you.
happens years today, so it's only
Thank you.
apropos that you be here with us. Let's talk about the hiring process when you came in, Dr. Martin, compared to now. Talk about the differences when you were coming into collegiate athletics compared to now, and some of the things that you may be doing during the hiring process.
Sure. So when you talk about the hiring process, I think you have to look at it from multiple lenses. If you're hiring an athletic administrator, an AD, or you're hiring a coach, I think right now, what's most important is that when you look at higher education from a macro lens, you're dealing with a different consumer. And so from that standpoint, things are a lot different than it was back in 2000, right? Almost 22 years ago. The pressure for athletic directors is insurmountable in terms of getting it right, making that right hire. And we all can agree that it's an educated guess. I don't care who you are. You don't know what's going to happen with making a hire. But whether you're hiring an athletic director or a coach, and I'm going to lean a little bit more on the coaching side, but it's about the resources are different now. The infrastructure needs are vastly different. The expectations of winning is different, and the pace of the searches. If you look at the searches that were conducted in 2000 versus the ones that are now, coaches are being hired in 2-3 days. If you have the infrastructure and resources, versus back then they took a little bit more time. The reliance on search firms. Search firms are key, and search firms are invaluable from a standpoint of it gives the AD a chance to get a different perspective and actually cover on a lot of different fronts. And so, I think the pressure both on the AD and the pressure on the coaches has really redefined what our roles are. And when you say, hey, I'm the Vice Chancellor, Director of Athletics at UMKC, today I have to explain it a lot more deeply and deeper than I would have in 2000. And I think that's relative to whether you're at UMKC or if you're at Texas or Oklahoma or Rutgers. So I think
let me interrupt you. Why do you think that is?
I think because when you imagine the arms race in college athletics, and what most people don't think about, Darryl, is why do we have an arms race? Well, it's because higher education is a business. Okay, higher education is a business. When you pay a football coach $115 million, okay, there's an expectation for a return on investment. Okay, that football coach makes more than the chancellor or president. So symbolically, what does that mean? What does that say? Right? And so there's a lot of people within higher education that hide from that reality, that our industry is a business. Now that we have name, image, and likeness, a lot of folks have come to terms with the fact that, yeah, we have to pay the student athletes. Yeah, we have to do certain things. We have to make certain concessions. But if you really do your research on higher education, it's a business. And college athletics is just one component of that.
Yeah. And that's, what the thing is with the hiring process, things have changed so dramatically. And it's very interesting when you're talking about from 2000 to now, 21 years later, the differences in regarding the hiring process. Let's talk about the prospecting, how people can find jobs, particularly, this is Rising Coaches. Of course, you serve on our board advisor for the DEI Alliance. Talk about
Sure.
from the coaching aspect, a lot of coaches are probably going to watch this and try to figure out, because this is the right fit, called the right fit. Talk about if you contract out with a search firm as compared to if you do the search internally yourself. Some of the things you may tell a search firm, and if you do it internally, some of the things you may focus on yourself.
Yeah, I think you made a great, I like your question. And I think as the coaches, they watch this, they want to know how they get the job, right? And so if we focus on that, I think it's critically important that athletic directors and administrators, we talk about the right fit, but we really don't expound on that and explain what that is. And the fit can be different at UMKC than it is at Mizzou, okay, or any other institution. But the fit has to be in alignment, not only with me as the AD, but it has to be in alignment with the president or chancellor. It has to be in alignment with the faculty. It has to be in alignment with a lot of the stakeholders in the community. That's one. Number two, from a preparation standpoint, it's important that coaches enter that interview not just about how you win games. It's important that they understand what is the mission of the university. What is the mission of the athletics department? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What are some of the recent successes of not only, one respective sport, but the entire athletics department? And what is your value proposition? Okay, how are you going to make the athletics department, but the university better? The other piece is we've entered a new era of student athlete welfare. And so how are you going to take that student athlete, that 18-year-old, and by the time he or she is 22, how do you take them from A to Z? How do you make them better? And what do you bring to the table to make them better, not only as a player, okay, but as a human being and a citizen, in our country? That's important. What type of awareness are you going to provide student athletes about their reality in the world? That's important. I think going that deep is critically important, because what does that speak to? That speaks to the speed of trust, right? Okay, and so if I can speak to the speed of trust, then that's going to make me feel like, hey, you're being transparent, you're being real with me, then you might be the right person for this opportunity. The other piece is what I've discovered over a couple of decades in this industry is that some coaches come in and they don't have a strategic vision of how they can.
And I'm glad you said that, because I find that even at the professional level, unfortunately for African American coaches and talking to white coaches, they say sometimes African American coaches don't come in with a strategic plan or strategic vision that they can actually demonstrate when trying to get the job.
Sure. And so it's about, what is your plan in year 1, 3, and 5? What is your plan for player development? What is your plan for the community? What is your plan in terms of communications with the larger campus community, with the students? What is your plan to communicate with not only the athletic director, but maybe the director of marketing? Maybe it's the deputy for development. What's your plan for that? And so it's a lot more holistic than saying, I'm going to go out and I'm going to recruit the best talent, because talent wins the games. Okay, well, I mean, there's something to say that we can't really refute that. But if I'm going to make a decision to hire you, I need to know that you're thinking about this in a more holistic way.
Let's talk about the do's and don'ts, and based on your experience when interviewing, some of the do's that you probably experienced that were real good, and talk about some of the don'ts And this is important for whether it's an administrator or a coach trying to obtain a position within collegiate athletics.
Yeah. I think ego is a problem, Darryl. Ego is a problem. There might be a coach who said, hey, you know what, I've had top 5 recruiting classes the last 5 years. I've done this, and so I don't need to come in as prepared as the other candidate. And that's not necessarily true. And so we have to put the ego at the door. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that you have to over prepare. I've been in interviews where one coach brought in 515 pages of information about how they would design a defense, right? And being over prepared. I mean, it was amazing to see the depth of preparation that this particular coach had. But I think it's important that coaches walk into that room and build some sort of trust, some sort of connection with the athletic director or whoever's in that room. It could be a search committee, right? Search firm, search committee, but build some trust, right? And so you have to be likable, right? So you can be very good, right? But if you don't walk into the room and you don't have a smile on your face, and if you got a candy red suit on and all of those things, I'm being funny, but you are the CEO and the president of your program, all right? And so you need to approach it that way. And so you need to be able to speak to every facet of the program. And not to say that you're not going to delegate different elements of that to your assistant coaches. That's why they're hired. But you need to be able to speak to that in great detail. Because as time moves on, these hires are critical. If you bring it close to home, this is how I feed my family.
Right.
Based off of the coaches that I hire. And so it's critically important that I'm able to trust you and that I know that you've done your due diligence.
Right. Well, you know what? Let's hold that thought. Let's come back. Let me take a commercial break, pay some bills so my boss won't get mad at me. And we'll be back here with The Right Fit with Vice Chancellor, Director of Athletics, University of Missouri, Kansas City, Dr. Brandon Martin.
The Right Fit podcast is brought to you by Rising Coaches Search and Consulting. Tired of spending what seems like all of your time and budget filling coaching vacancies? Let Rising Coaches Search and Consulting handle your next coaching search. Our process is simple. We identify, vet, and recruit a talented and diverse group of professionals that fits your institution's profile. All for a low price that we guarantee will beat our competitions. Plus, all of your searches will be handled by former coaches, meaning we will get the best possible insight on all of your candidates, and you'll get the perspective that only a former coach could provide. For testimonials, a full client list, or more information, please visit risingcoaches.com.
Welcome back to The Right Fit, here with Vice Chancellor, Director of Athletics, Dr. Brandon Martin, University of Missouri, Kansas City. We're talking about the right fit in terms of athletic administration, as well as on the coaching side as well. Dr. Martin, let's talk about how to get your foot in the door, navigating within the industry, both from an administrative side and coaching side as well. You kind of hit on it a little bit about the coaching side, but talk about some of the things anybody that's aspiring to get into collegiate athletics, whether they want to be a coach or athletic administrator, some of the things they should do.
Number one is humility. So there's, especially with this new generation, there's this expectation that they're going to go from this, graduate assistant all the way up to being a deputy athletic director in a span of 2 or 3 years. And that's just not the case. And so I think humility, understanding that You might have to start as a graduate assistant. You might have to start as a director at the bottom floor and be willing to work your way up. So humility is another one. Number two would be your network and the people who can serve as advisors and mentors for you in your climb up the ladder. And so one of the things that I talk about, and this is from Bob Bodine's book, is, who's on your personal board of directors, right? Who's going to be that person who's a trusted advisor, a trusted friend, a trusted colleague that you can call on when it's time for you to get that opportunity. Number three is work ethic. Being willing to outwork the next person beside you. Being willing to sacrifice the weekends. Most people view the weekends as a chance to recover. But being able to say, you know what, Saturday is just another work day. And if I want to be that deputy AD, if I want to be that head coach, I need to watch film, or, I need to be able to have a report ready for my athletic director and go that extra mile. I go back to, from 2000 to 2010 when I was at USC during the dynasty years at SC. There were days when I would, sleep on the couch in my office and just learn from Pete and his staff. Not so much about football, because I'm not a coach. I didn't have any desire to be a coach, but from a leadership standpoint, being able to understand, how they approach things. And what that also allowed me to do was build trust with that staff. And so you have to be able to be uncommon, as Coach Dungy says. You have to be uncommon, and you have to do uncommon things to be able to be successful.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, you sleeping on the couch. Me, of course, a former coach, I slept on my office couch many of nights after a bad loss, watching film, just staying in the office trying to get it right.
Yeah.
Taking a shower and all that kind of stuff. And also, you go to these professional development things for coaches, particularly the NCAA Final Four, and with administrators as an actor. And I've heard a lot of people say they didn't have the money, but somebody else put them up. They slept on the floor and they did X, Y, and Z. So, those are the things you talked about, being uncommon. And, another phrase is learning how to be uncomfortable, as well.
That's right.
And another thing you hit on there was very important is about collegiate athletics and pro sport is not a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
It's a 24/7, occupation, if you want to call it that. If you're passionate about it, it's not an occupation, as well. Let's talk about change. One of the things we're experiencing now across all sports is changes, particularly in collegiate athletics. The NCAA is beginning to look at a lot of things to do some restructuring. You mentioned the NIL coming into play. Talk about some of the changes or some of the trends that you think someone needs to be abreast of, or some of the trends that may become commonplace down the road in collegiate athletics.
Yeah, I think the two that I will point out is one that I've mentioned already is name, image, and likeness. That one there it's fluid. It's defined, but it's still loose, for lack of a better word, in terms of the do's and don'ts. But it's going to be a great mechanism for programs to compete. I think it's also another way to increase the divide between the have and have-nots. The other one is the transfer portal continues to be a big one. And this is rising coaches. So most of the coaches who are listening in, they understand the opportunities, but also the frustrations with the transfer portal. When we talk about the new consumer,
right,
the new student athlete, they're different than when we came out, different than, when I played, when you came out. And this consumer has different needs. and they have very short attention spans, and they're entitled. And so given that, the head coach's job has changed. And a lot of people don't want to talk about this, but the head coach's job has changed from just saying, hey, I'm going to win games. Well, how can you win games when you don't have any continuity on your team? Right. And so it's changed, which means that the athletic director's lens has changed as well. Right. And so all of that stuff is critical. Now, we can spend time complaining about it and all the downside of it, but I think we need to approach it with a growth mindset, with the opportunities. And so those are the two things that I would really highlight. Maybe the last one would be, this conversation around the senior minority administrator position in college athletics. And there's a lot of proponents of it. And the people who are proponents are the most informed. But there's also folks who are proponents to check a box. And ideally, we want this senior minority administrator to be in the huddle. Right. And if you're in the huddle, that means that you're involved in the executive decisions that are made in the athletics department. Okay. If you're not in the huddle, you don't know what plays are being ran. If you don't know what plays are being ran, then you don't even know really how to go to step A, B, and C. So when we talk about job duties, we don't want this administrator to just be over, some of the functions of the athletics department that I don't want to say don't matter, okay, but they're not the most significant. We want this administrator to have responsibility over revenue generating sports, okay? We want this administrator to have fundraising experience, all right? We want this administrator to be involved in strategic planning. Why? Because that's how you develop the pipeline for those administrators to get opportunities. Not just to say, okay, I have a person of color on my staff and they're over these 4 duties, to where when they have a conversation with the search firms, then they say, well, okay, well, you're not over football or basketball. Okay, well, we're just going to, exclude you from this search. That's not what we want.
The thing is, you hit on some great points, and I wish we had more time. I know we pressed for time. So what I do with all my guests, I do something what I call word association, and it's very interesting the response we get here. But it's nothing that none of the guests seem to have any issue with. So I'm gonna just say a word, and you give me the first thing that comes to mind. UMKC.
Acres of diamonds.
California.
Home.
Family.
Love.
And finally, collegiate athletics.
Ever changing.
Dr. Martin, thank you for taking the time to join me. Morning your time, afternoon my time here on the East Coast. And I want to thank the viewers and listeners for joining us. Join us next Friday again for another great guest here on the Right Fit podcast. Until then, I'm Darryl Jacobs. Please stay healthy, stay safe. Talk to you very soon.